2 weeks away. Sounds a lot better than it did when it was just months off. Sounds like it's tangible. It's here. It's just right on the precipice of college football as Oklahoma, of course, opens the season against Tulane. Welcome in for the next hour or so here at Sooners Live with Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football. Please leave your comments and your questions. You guys know what the drill is. We will have plenty to talk about between the two of us, but leave your comments and your questions because you ultimately produce the show. Jason, how's it going today?
Doing good, Mark. Like you said, 2 weeks away, about 8 days away from week 0. So we've got some semblance of college football starting a week from tomorrow. So it's an exciting time. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. It is exciting, and we will take a dive into the Tulane situation and personnel next week. Today, we will unveil Jason's Big 12 predictions, and also we've got some news from camp. But first of all, we will start by going into the future, and unfortunately, a decommitment from one of the very best in the nation.
Yeah, so I think, Mark, this was something that the Oklahoma coaching staff and some people thought was happening, for a couple of weeks, and it was made official this week. One of the Oklahoma's best commitments for the 2022 class, Luther Burden, wide receiver out of Missouri, had officially decommitted to Oklahoma. So, like I said, this was something that I think the coaching staff was aware of over the last couple of weeks that could be incoming pretty quickly. And like I said, the announcement came this week. So, I think on one hand, it's a little concerning, understanding that Oklahoma has lost 3 top 100 wide receivers over the course of this 2020 cycle here through the spring, through the summer. So I think that's concerning from that respect. But I think you also have to have a little bit of faith in the coaching staff and a little bit of faith in Lincoln Riley. They've never really struggled to get wide receiver talent in. So now if you're looking at this and Oklahoma's lost a 5-star defensive lineman or a linebacker or maybe even a quarterback, maybe that's something that's a little bit more concerning. But I think the first year that Oklahoma struggles massively at talent at the wide receiver position, and then that will be news at that point. So right now, yes, it's a hit. Yes, I think Oklahoma has to go back to the drawing board a little bit. But Lincoln Riley talked a little bit about this and the change, really kind of the paradigm shift in recruiting. Mark, just kind of moving forward on how not only Oklahoma but a lot of these teams navigate recruiting with NIL and then with COVID in terms of having some of those rosters a little bit higher than what you would expect in a year. So Oklahoma's been very successful about getting some wide receivers through the portal, specifically Mike Woods this year. So I think Oklahoma, not great position, but I think it's not a time to panic if you're an Oklahoma fan looking at the trend of wide receiver decommits. And I think one of the things, NIL is going to be such a big part of recruiting these days. Oklahoma has had one wide receiver decommit, go to SMU, really because he felt like he had a stronger brand earning potential in the Dallas area where he's from versus going to Oklahoma. And really, kind of the same thing here. You can lead because I think Missouri is one of the leaders right now for his services after the decommitment local. So I think some of these kids have the mindset when they're thinking about recruiting to a team. It's not necessarily just an individual coach or an individual program. I think part of their decision making now is understanding what is my, as new and as maybe awkward and uncomfortable it is to talk about, some of these kids are talking about what is their earning potential at a school like Oklahoma, whereas like that they're known in the state of Missouri and maybe that locally in Missouri they feel like that they can maybe earn a lot more from an NIL perspective. So I think it'll be interesting not only how Oklahoma rebounds for this on the wide receiver front for 2022, but what that recruiting kind of looks like across the country.
I was a bit taken back, and I should not have been, when Quinn Ewers, the Ohio State commit and signee now, decided to skip his senior season. So that wasn't what surprised me. It was that he was very outspoken, and the reasons given, number one, NIL. He just stated it flat out. He didn't even try to massage it in any way. So it's a very real thing, and the players are so social media and worldly savvy than they would have been years ago that they're just going to make that a major part of the decision process. And of course, I'm speaking in generalities. It depends
Sure.
on the player and what their priorities are. Jason, did it seem with Luther Burden as though this decommitment was a situation where the relationship had better times and he's looking elsewhere exclusively, or where he's just opening up the commitment and Oklahoma's still very much in play?
Yeah, I think Oklahoma's still in play, Mark. I think he's just opening up the commitment. Certainly, I think there's other schools like Missouri and maybe Georgia's kind of in the loop now in terms of what that looks like. But he's had a tremendous relationship with Dennis Simmons. He talked about that at length at his relationship that he's had with Dennis Simmons through this recruiting process. Still views him as not only maybe kind of a mentor, but a good friend that he's been able to trust and talk to. And I think one of the things, if Georgia gets into the mix, it's how do I put this? It may be a war that Oklahoma's not willing to get into from a recruiting perspective. In terms of, unfortunately, it could be something that just Oklahoma's not in a position to get into that with some of these schools. So I think the relationship's still solid. I think that's still open. Oklahoma's not going to quit pursuing him. Yeah, they're going to move on to some other targets that they have that they may be cooled off on. And I think one of the things that it's hard to pinpoint a guy like Dennis Simmons, who has been really good since he's been to Oklahoma on the recruiting trail. He's got several high-profile 5-star wide receivers, Jaden Hazelwood, Theo Weiss, Trajan Bridges, even though he's no longer with the program. He was really integral in getting some of those kids over to Oklahoma. But I think the one thing that Oklahoma has struggled with a little bit, they've bowed out in some of these races a little bit sooner than maybe they should have, meaning, they got a pledge from, they've got these. At one time, they had 3 of the top 100 wide receivers in the country, and they've been in with some of these other kids, and they've kind of bowed out in some of those relationships and some of those recruiting. Just say, okay, we're moving on. We've got these guys. So I think Oklahoma may look at changing that strategy up a little bit, having a little bit too much trust in some of these 17, 18-year-old kids in terms of how solid their decisions are.
Folks, we talk Oklahoma football here every Friday with Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football, typically at 2:30 Eastern Time. We've been pretty consistent with keeping that time, but please subscribe and hit that bell for the notifications to make sure that you know when we're going live, because sometimes due to scheduling conflicts, we need to change up the time. But typically 2:30 Eastern every Friday, 1:30 there in Oklahoma, where it's most important. And Sooner fans, you've got to get used to the format here, the Voice of College Football, just in regards to the number of fan bases that take part in the live chat. So it's not going to be like 98% Oklahoma. So right out of the gate, Miami, Ohio State, and others we see here in the live chat. So 904 Hurricane, thank you that regardless of the show, Miami or otherwise, that you're here supporting. Thank you so much for reminding everyone to hit the like button. So before you get settled, before you want to just take in Jason's analysis, hit the like button to help out the channel. So 904 Hurricane, we always appreciate you. Cheryl, thank you for being here. Cheryl's a Buckeyes fan, but catches as many live streams as she possibly can. So Cheryl, we appreciate you. We got V-Note, Do Most Vision. Thank you for being here, Boomer Sooner. So we got an Oklahoma fan. Good to see. Leave your comments and your questions down below. We see from D-Rock Irish and others. We do have a Sooner question coming in from John. John, good to see you. John catches us on a regular basis as well across our plethora of live streams. So John's asking, is Oklahoma likely to get more pass run balanced this year, or be more like Baker Mayfield's last year, almost 2 to 3 times pass heavy?
Well, I think it's an interesting question, John, because they were even more pass heavy last year, specifically early on in the year, because Oklahoma was still, they were the running back depth wasn't where it typically is. They had a couple of guys out. Ramondre Stevenson was out for the first half of the year. TJ Pledger missed that opening game because of the COVID protocol. So Oklahoma relied on the passing game a little bit more. It took a little bit longer for the offensive line to gel. So I think Oklahoma was a little bit more pass heavy. They averaged over 300 yards on the ground, and really wasn't up to what they prototypically are from a running game perspective. Now, that increased as the year went on. The offensive line gelled a little bit. Ramondre Stevenson was back in the fold, so they ran the ball really well, specifically to end the season against Iowa State and against Florida. So I do think that there'll be a little bit more balanced this year, John. So I think we'll see you'll see closer to what they were under. With not necessarily with Baker Mayfield, but with Kyler Murray, with Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts, they were maybe even a little bit more run heavy. So I think, they like their pieces on the offensive line. I think they feel like they got 7 or 8 guys that are ready, early on to play and to play really effectively at a high level. So I think the one concern that you have coming into the season is the depth at the running back position. So I think as long as Eric Gray, Kennedy Brooks, Trey Bradford, as long as those kids stay healthy, I think you will see a bigger dose of the running game this year. However, if they start seeing some injuries, they may have to rely on the passing game a little bit more.
Oklahoma fans, once again, we're here every Friday, so please let other Sooner fans know. In particular, college football fans are welcome across the board. As you can see, we're represented all over the place, but especially with Oklahoma football fans, please let them know. The ones that out there on social media or personally, that we're here every Friday. And if you can't catch us on Friday, what we do is, of course, the video posts. So about 15 to 20 minutes afterwards, you can catch the complete show. But we would love for you to be here live. We also cut up the clips to make sure that if you're only interested in a particular topic, that you can catch that specifically. All right. We also have, and Jason's going to get to his camp notes here in a second, but Weston Sloan asking about the center position. Jason addressed it last week fairly in depth, but we understand not everybody can catch all the content. So the center position is pretty crucial.
Yeah, it is crucial. I think, for everything that Oklahoma asked, Bill Bedenbaugh asked his team to do offensively, from an offensive line perspective, I think the center is certainly the most important position on the offensive line. But I think as we've talked through the offseason here and in the fall camp, I think it's the biggest hole that Oklahoma had to fill, maybe in the entire team. So I think from everything that I've seen, everything that I've heard, I think Andrew Rame is really kind of taken that position and kind of ran with it. I think, it didn't really take long. I think he kind of started to separate himself a little bit outside of, at the later parts of the spring season, and then he's taken that over. He's done exactly what they would want him to do. He's gotten stronger, in terms of the off-season weight conditioning, the weight program, and I think he's shown a lot of leadership early on in some of the interviews that I've seen. So I think he's a guy that what Oklahoma would have liked is for him to kind of take that job early on in campus. So that's what exactly has happened. So yes, I think it's it's certainly an area of great importance for Oklahoma, but I think it's one that Oklahoma feels pretty comfortable with having him there.
Cheryl chiming in concerning a former Buckeye, and we know what the deal is with Alex Grinch. He did a remarkable job with the Washington State defense. It's just amazing to see the metrics and what they were with, not exaggerating, 2-star and 3-star defenders playing on that side of the ball for Washington State. He goes to Ohio State, had to kind of share duties. I think that they had maybe too much talent on the coaching staff, and they should have just cut it loose with either he or Greg Schiano. Goes to Oklahoma. And I got to tell you, Jason, because Oklahoma is obviously on everybody's minds from a national perspective, is that regardless of the show, if we're talking National College Football or even another team, Oklahoma will slide into the conversation at times. Of course, if I'm talking Clemson or Ohio State, those big teams in particular, and the media seems to be a bit split on whether this Oklahoma defensive upgrade is legit or not. Cheryl asking about the upgrades to the defense.
It is, Mark, I think that's the biggest question, in the offseason, certainly, and then coming into this season. Now look, the improvements are paramount that we've seen so far from Oklahoma. They were, when Grinch took over, unfortunately, it's hard to imagine at a school like Oklahoma, but they were one of the worst defenses in the country 3 years ago. 2 years ago, they made some improvements, not anywhere near where they wanted to be, but certainly made some improvements. And then last year, they ended up 29th overall defensive in the country. And then when you look at the last 6 games, they gave up 16 points a game. So I think that's exactly where you want to be. So that shows the improvement. I think one of the big areas of improvement, they got a guy that was able to solidify that nickel spot, which is really important in Alex Grinch's defense, one. And I think, two, they were able to finally kind of change the narrative in terms of their turnovers. That's something that Alex Grinch has preached since he's been here. So I think if you see an Oklahoma team that goes throughout the season, if they're giving up 17 points a game, that can continue from the last 6 games into the balance of the season. I think you have an Oklahoma team that is certainly in the playoffs and battling for a national championship. And I think, Mark, it's very interesting. I've over the last week or so, I've watched a lot of national stuff in terms of there's a lot of playoff prediction stuff, and more I'm seeing more people go out on that limb and at least pick Oklahoma to win a playoff game. Certainly not everyone's going so far as to predict them to win the national championship. So I think a lot of people are buying in to what Oklahoma is selling on the defensive side of the ball. And certainly we'll get into that with our fall camp notes. But I think Grinch is doing everything that he can. He's putting these kids in the right position to be successful. And I think it's not necessarily a make it or break it year, but I think in the 3rd year in Grinch's system here, he has his players. And there's lots of commentary this week about how much the talent level has improved on that side of the ball. And so I think it's kind of a put up or shut up year. He's not going to get fired or there's nothing like that, so to speak. But I think a lot of people point to this as the year where Oklahoma can challenge, and a lot of that rides on exactly how prolific they can be on the defensive side of the ball.
And another key on that side of the ball is certainly Nick Benito. 904 Hurricane just asking about him possibly even getting better.
So I think it's very interesting, Mark. So one thing that I heard this week is from multiple sources. A lot of people believe Nick Benito could be the best player on the team, not the defense, on the team. So I think there was a lot of concern. Well, maybe not concern is the right word, but just worry coming into this season because Benito was flirting with the draft. He elected to come back. He's got a lot of attention this year, just in terms of kind of preseason awards, and things, wondering if he would kind of rest on the season he had last year. But, kind of from some of the sources I've talked to early on said that he is early on in fall practice so much better than where he was a year ago. He's put on some weight. He has the ability to, kind of go in some of those inside rushes, and then he bends really well on the outside rush. So, granted, he had a great season last year. I think 8 or 8.5 sacks total for the season for Benito. So I think there's a lot of positive coming in about him throughout the fall camp here.
All right, John checking in from Morgantown, West Virginia. Big Ten brethren, at least for the time being. Didn't last long, but West Virginia most likely looking for another conference. We shall see. Speaking of which, D-Rock Irish is very interested in this situation involving the Big Ten, the ACC, and the Pac-12. They had recent talks, so that's not a rumor. That's been substantiated. They are talking. We don't know exactly what they're talking about besides an alliance. So to me, an alliance and realignment are two different things.
Absolutely.
Jason, when we talk realignment, if we're thinking that because of what the SEC's done as already the best conference, and then you add 2 major top 5 to 10 brands, that this would be a counter move if taken to the extreme. That would be basically saying we're going to get ahead of the curve and counter anything that you can do in plucking away Florida State and Clemson or becoming some kind of super conference. We're going to beat you to the punch and become a super conference first. So either they all 3 get together. The maximum possibility here is they all 3 to get together, and you're talking about 20, what? 8 and 12 is 20. You're talking about, no. I'm messing up the math here. The Big Ten and the ACC have 28 between them. So you're talking about 40 schools. Okay. So that's not a conference. Well, maybe in the future it is a conference, but the way I think about conferences, and then, or is it just kind of some kind of partnership involving scheduling? Because if it involves schedule, not to cut you off, Jason, just want to finish my thought. If it involves schedules, then what they're basically doing is kind of determining that we're going to play quality games amongst each other, and you would almost be shutting out the SEC, or there would be no reason to have a scheduling alliance.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. It's not a realignment in terms of, let me say I don't know anything obviously for sure, but I don't think it's going to be a realignment as such as what Oklahoma and Texas did, certainly within the SEC. But I think it will be a realignment in terms of, to your point, Mark, a scheduling alliance. And I think a lot of this is about money, certainly to get a better, really a better chunk of the prize, because they understand, look, Oklahoma going into the SEC is going to get reportedly at least double what they make currently in the Big 12. So I think a lot of these schools in the ACC, exactly to your point, they don't want to get plucked, and I think they want to make it a little bit more lucrative for them. And I think part of this is also about, I think there's an idea that some of these schools, they want to block the playoffs from expanding. I think right now with Oklahoma and Texas joining the SEC, and I think the SEC is over here saying, yeah, we're fine. Let's just stick it at 4. We're fine keeping it at 4. So I think at a minimum, this is certainly going to push back the playoff expansion a little bit. But I think it'll be interesting as the details come out. I think we've seen, this morning that, as early as next week or within a couple of weeks, there might be some news specific to that. But yes, to your point, Mark, I think it's specifically around scheduling, specifically around what are some things that we can do to compete with the money that the SEC is getting right now. And I think more than anything, I mean, we've talked about the future of the Big 12. I mean, the fact that didn't even get a seat at the table here. I mean, I think that speaks volumes on where they are at the future from a conference perspective. So, it's unfortunate. And so I know we've got some West Virginia people on here watching. I know we've probably got some Oklahoma State people, potentially watching. So it'll be interesting to see, exactly, what they do. I know that they're not going to. Some of those teams aren't going to want to, lay down. And now's not the time necessarily to be passive. But so what do they do? Are they a little bit more aggressive now, knowing that, okay, we're maybe for the short term, the next few years, the money's going to be the same, but 4 years from now, at a minimum, 4 years from now, their chunk of the prize is way, way down from what it was before.
Yeah, for those teams left in the Big 12, their football futures are on the line. Are they going to shut down their football program? Of course not. They're making too much money and they're too substantial. But from the standpoint of, are we going to continue to be seen as, and in the new reality going forward, the 12-team playoff proposal and the conference structure, are we going to continue to be a power program, or are we going to be a group of 5 program? There's going to be even more of a distinction between those two levels. Not that there isn't now. We've had 7 playoffs and nobody from the group of 5 has made it. Now that spot's going to be guaranteed as it appears in this new playoff proposal, but I don't think for those teams that have their sights set on, and maybe an Oklahoma State and a TCU, maybe that is an aspiration to get to the playoffs. Do you want to be fighting for one spot amongst 60 teams as opposed to fighting for 11 spots amongst 60 teams? Number one. Number two, just the money gap is enormous and will be even more so as we move forward. So they are teetering on the brink. Some very good football programs as in terms of staying with the big boys or being relegated to second division. Edward. So Edward, I apologize. You've written a couple posts that I couldn't necessarily make it out. I wanted to go through them. So I'm going to try to interpret here. He's got Oklahoma going all the way at 15-0. Wait till Oklahoma joins the SEC West, which we believe it could be a division, it could be a pod system, whatever it is. That would make sense. They're going to beat up on Alabama. Oklahoma, I always love this term, Jason, because it's many times used a bit out of context, but Oklahoma owns Alabama. The series record is 4-2, so Oklahoma maintains bragging rights, no question. But I don't know if they own Alabama.
Yeah, I think one of the things you have to keep in mind on that series is two of those wins are when Alabama was down and Oklahoma was really up. 2001 and 2003 in Tuscaloosa. So, and both of those games were really close. With that being said, so yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly good. Obviously, that Oklahoma does hold that head-to-head record, but certainly, I would steer clear of the owns. Terminology, just because of the context of when Oklahoma beat them and where Alabama was at that point. That was before Saban even came, but they're going to get the opportunity here in the next few years, maybe even this year.
You can take those series comparisons in a number of directions, and I think as long as the criteria is set, they're all legit, whether it's saying, okay, you take your team or your program versus my team or my program, and let's have a debate. Who's better right now? Right this second, who's better? You can take it that direction, or you can go all time. Who's better? Who's better all time? And then you could say, we could care less about 1925, so we're going to set a parameter on years, the last 50 years, the last 20 years, the last 10 years, just so there's an understanding over what time period we're making this comparison, because sometimes people like to play it to their advantage in terms of these all-time comparisons.
Yeah, I think it's, if you want to compare Oklahoma and Alabama, I think, and some of this might be a little bit hard for people here to hear right now. But in terms of overall program right now, Alabama is clearly the best program in college football. When you look at how many championships they've won under Saban, and when you look at just the product that they roll in and out every single year, they don't have a down year. And if they have a down year, it's still, in typically an SEC championship or playing for the opportunity to go to the SEC championship game in the last game of the year. So, we talked about recruiting. Alabama recently just had the best recruiting year of any school in the history of when they started, putting together these classes by 247. So yeah, I think, Alabama's there, but that's the target, right? That's where Oklahoma is looking to get to as an overall consistency of a program.
I think basically, and I'll pick on a few different fan bases, not specifically them, but as an example, if you root for Purdue, if you root for Stanford, if you root for North Carolina State, well, you want your team to succeed. You have certain expectations, but if you're reasonable, you understand your place in college football. So when the discussion is going around about the best program of all time or the top 10 of all time, you just know you're not in the discussion. So you take part or listen or whatever. But I think there's a chip on the shoulder of an Oklahoma or an Ohio State. Really, those two, I'll take Clemson out of the mix just because historically they don't measure up. So Ohio State and Oklahoma would be the only two besides Alabama that both currently, right this second, and historically can levy some kind of an argument. So when you're in that position as either a fan or a supporter, then it rubs you the wrong way when you're number 2 or number 3. Right. You want to be number 1 because you do have an argument there. But to Jason's point, my goodness, I want to do this with Oklahoma's rankings since the coaches poll and the AP polls are out. I've done this with a number of other schools, Michigan, Ohio State, and I'll bring up Ohio State because, again, the comparison to Oklahoma is valid. It's remarkable in the last 20 years how consistently they have been ranked in the top 5 to 10, usually the top 5 in the nation preseason and postseason. Their rankings are almost like you'll see like 4, 3, 3, 2, 6, 6, from preseason to postseason. Every year this has been going on for 20 years. But to Jason's point, hey, if you're an Ohio State fan, if you look at it reasonably, and I'll put Oklahoma in the same category, Alabama is just a cut above.
Yeah.
Ohio State put an NFL team on the field in the championship game last year, and they couldn't keep up. That's how good Alabama is. All right. V-Note is looking for those 2 starting safeties.
So I think, at the safety position, you got one position that's pretty well nailed down, from a strong safety perspective. Delarin Turner-Yell, he'll be your starter. He's been a starter for the last few years. Had a great spring, and I feel like that he's carried that over into the fall. So I think he'll be one of your starters. I think there's still a battle on the other safety between Pat Fields and Key Lawrence. I think the deal with Key Lawrence is he's got to be consistent every single day. From everything that I've heard, he's bringing that consistency a little bit better here in fall camp. But look, a guy like Pat Fields, he's a multiple year starter. He may not have the same athletic ability and ceiling that a guy named Key Lawrence does, but I've went back and forth on this a couple of times, Mark, just kind of doing a little bit of a depth chart projection. I think when you look at it just from a talent perspective coming in, I could see Key Lawrence being the guy, but just on a guy maybe that they trust a little bit more. Maybe Pat Fields is the guy. So I would say coming into the first game of the year, I say Pat Fields still probably is your starter, but I don't know that it's going to matter a ton because they're going to shuffle kids in and out of that lineup so much this year that I think it matter. Both of those kids will get to play a lot.
We talk Oklahoma football with all of you each and every Friday at 2:30 Eastern, but please subscribe to the channel and hit that bell for the notifications because sometimes we need to deviate based on scheduling conflicts. But 2:30 Eastern, 1:30 Central is the time to talk Oklahoma football live with us. If you get in here late, just wait for the video to process and post, which takes about 15 minutes. Dive back in and catch what you missed. Also, keep in mind that we are only 15 days away from college football in terms of Oklahoma and Tulane getting on the field. And Jason's going to be here live after the Oklahoma-Tulane game to provide post-game analysis, his take on the game, respond to your comments and your questions. So you've got an interactive post-game right here on our Voice of College Football Oklahoma channel, courtesy Jason. And in the meantime, check out his work at Last Word on College Football. It's Last Word on College Football. Those guys over there have been amazing to me throughout the years. Jason, Kevin, Tony, and we're actually going to have Tony on for a live stream to talk the LSU-UCLA game, which is a big one, of course, in week 1 as well. I find it interesting, and I probably made this comment at some point in the offseason, that Oklahoma is traveling to Tulane. Does that benefit the Sooners in any way?
I mean, I think there's an angle, I guess, that you could use from a recruiting perspective in the New Orleans area, but it is very strange, Mark, for a team like Oklahoma to go play in at an American conference, and I think a conference stadium. I think one of the things that's interesting is that stadium it only holds 30,000 people. So when you look at it, I was trying to go back and look at when was the last time that, obviously taken away last year because being an anomaly, when is the last time conference, non-conference, anywhere that a team like Oklahoma has played in a 30,000 seat stadium? And I think the last time that I can remember is I don't remember. I'm trying to recall the year. I think it might have been 2007. Oklahoma went, maybe even sooner than that. Now that I think about it, Oklahoma went to Tulsa and they played a couple of games in Tulsa. So, and their stadium holds 30,000 people as well. So, yeah. So I think there's some. I think these coaches will always get any kind of recruiting advantage that they can get. This is a 2-for-1 deal with Tulane. So, yeah. I think if they can get any kind of a footprint in the New Orleans area, I think it's probably worth it.
It's another money situation in which that prohibits those schools from taking those trips, and they just don't need to. They want to play as many home games as possible. for those big brands that might be down. They certainly don't want to subject themselves to a possible embarrassing loss. Figure Texas going to Louisiana instead of the other way around. But I would love to see big brands travel to, the group of 5 conferences in their region. Ohio State, Michigan go to the MAC, and Oklahoma and Texas go to, I guess, the Mountain West possibly, or, those sorts of matchups. The SEC go to the Sun Belt. I would think would be. There was a game. Well, no, that wouldn't have been a road game. I was the Houston opener came to mind. In 2016? But that was played at the NFL stadium, correct?
Well, but this year, when you look at the Big 12 overall, you have Iowa State going to Vegas. They play UNLV. You've got Oklahoma State. They play at Boise State within the first few weeks of the year. So there's a couple of teams from the Big 12 that's doing that. I think West Virginia has a game. Obviously, it's not a mid-major, but West Virginia goes to Maryland. I think the first game of the year. So I think the Big 12 has done a little bit better job in terms of scheduling some of those out of conference road games.
Jason Ray's here to talk Oklahoma football with you. I will dive into the live chat as I have been to gather your comments and questions. All right. Any other news? You've answered quite a bit concerning what's going on in fall camp, especially on the defensive side. Anything else that you've picked up in the last week?
So yeah, Mark, I think the thing it's very difficult, at least for me, and going through the fall, you have to be able to kind of be in a position to weed out more of the sunshine pumping type things of everybody's excited before the season. Things is what's really kind of happening on the ground. So I think from everything that I'm hearing within the coaching staff, just in general, is I think they're more excited about this team. Not only, I know that they were excited in the spring, but how they've reacted to the summer, the workout program, how they've come in ready to, kind of ready to do their business. There's not a lot of joking around on the practice fields from everything that I've heard. Yeah, when practice is over, they'll do that, but when they're in between the lines, they're extremely serious. I think they're down to business type of thing. So I think there's there just continues to be a lot of optimism within the program itself. So let's go through kind of not obviously every single position, but kind of from an offense and defense perspective. Eric Gray continues to shine. I think so. He's done everything that they've asked for him from the spring into the fall. So he's continued to play well. And I think, the forgotten man has a little bit been Kennedy Brooks. Everything I've heard this week is he's pretty much back to where he was pre-sit out. So, he's a little bit rusty in the spring, but he's there. So I think those are the first 2 guys. Trey Bradford is a guy that they really like a lot. Still learning the offense a little bit. He was a little bit banged up in camp. He was back. He's back. I was told made a couple of pretty good runs in the scrimmage that they had last week. So I think those are your top 3 guys. I think there's a lot of everything I'm hearing. There's still a lot of uncertainty regarding Marcus Major in terms of his availability, at least early on with the academic issues. So that's something. The wide receivers are, there's probably not a CeeDee Lamb in the group, but there's a lot of talent there. I think they got 6 guys that they feel comfortable with. Jaden Hazelwood has taken a huge leap from what I've heard. A lot more fluid, a lot quicker. A lot more explosive, more like the 2019 version of him that they expected. I think Mike Woods is a guy that's been extremely impressive to them. Not incredibly surprising given where he was at Arkansas, but he's a guy that's been really impressive. The name to watch, he's not completely under the radar. Braden Willis, from a tight end perspective, Austin Stogner's not quite back 100%, but he's close. And I think Braden Willis is he's transformed his body. He looks the part. He's had some, he's been unlucky a little bit with injuries from time to time. So I think he's a guy to watch for that's going to make some, he's going to be a little bit more part of the offense this year. And I think overall the offensive line, I think they got about 7 or 8 guys that they feel pretty comfortable with right now. They still don't have the depth that they would love to have, across the board, specifically at tackle position. But I do think that they like the guys, and I like the jump that they've made. And then when you look at the defensive guys, the accolades and the excitement and the overall hype for this unit it's off the chart. It's just every single day you kind of hear something different that kind of gets you excited to see exactly where that Oklahoma defense is. You had asked, it was kind of interesting, Mark. I think you'd asked me last week on legitimately how many guys are going to play, and hearing a lot from the coaching staff, and I think comfortably you could say that they're gonna throw about 25 guys out there, which is kind of surprising to see. But they like their depth on the defensive line, and just to show you, I think, just to paint a picture from what I've kind of some of the things that I've been hearing on how excited and how good they think that defensive line group is going to be. Number one, they feel like that they're probably about 12 to 14 deep in terms of the defensive line and the ends. They've been so dominant in practice that they had their first scrimmage, and it was Oklahoma really they scaled it back a little bit because they didn't want anyone to get injured, partly. And I think they've just been incredibly dominant, almost unblockable from some of the things that I've heard. So that's something that you would expect early on in camp. The offense kind of gets back a little bit. Certainly later on in camp, and battling back and forth. I was told that the offense, did a little bit better in terms of the scrimmage. But there's just a lot of excitement about this defensive line. Probably the best on paper right now. Certainly they got to go do it, I think, on paper since probably the 2004 season. So I think if they can bring that, that as we illustrated a little bit earlier, the last 6 games they averaged about 6. They gave up about 16, 17 points a game. If they can be that, if that can go throughout the season, I think Oklahoma has a really good chance to make it back to the playoffs.
Folks, we've got a store at voiceofcollegefootball.com. So go to voiceofcollegefootball.com, go straight to the top of the screen, and you will find where it says store. Just click on that, pick your team. Obviously, assuming most of you are Oklahoma fans, you're right there. You've got all sorts of options in regards to what you can purchase there. But we've got the entire Power 5 and some FCS and Group of 5 teams available as well. So once again, voiceofcollegefootball.com, and check out our store options there. And we've got some other things available there as well, but we'll keep it focused on the store right now and gear up for college football season. All right, let me get that off the screen. Okay. Also, I'm going to do a little. I should have asked Jason this off camera, but I just want to make sure. Jason, did I ask you if you wanted to submit your college football predictions every week?
You did, yeah.
Absolutely. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
My apologies. I got my list here on my laptop, but I've asked so many people. So on Patreon every week, everyone, we are going to have media picks. So Jason, myself, tons of other media, about 15 total, will be submitting their college football picks each and every week, straight up and against the spread. So please join us on Patreon. Just search MarkRogersTV. Again, Patreon, MarkRogersTV. You get your media picks and mine as well, and a whole lot of other things going on there. Speaking of predictions, while we still await football season, it's still talking season, and talking involves, making those picks. So Jason is ready to unveil his Big 12 predictions for 2021. Jason, you're up. Whether you want to take this from bottom to top or top to bottom,
yeah,
let me know.
Bottom to top is fine.
All right, here we go.
All right, so to no one's surprise, number 10 we have Kansas. So I think the opening game of the season is probably your best bet for a victory from Kansas. They host South Dakota. Non-conference isn't incredibly kind to them. They go to Coastal Carolina the second week of the year, then they play at Duke. So I've got them winning winning the game against South Dakota, but then not winning another game. However, I do think Lance Leopold is a really good hire for them. I think he's going to if he's given the right amount of time, I think he's going to turn that around to a certain extent. Number 9, I got Texas Tech. I think they'll be a little bit more improved on the offensive side of the ball. I just worry about their defense, particularly the defensive line and the secondary from last year. It's kind of the same old story with Texas Tech, unfortunately, for those of you in Lubbock. It's they have a really good offense, but they don't have quite the athletes on the defensive side of the ball. And then at number 8, I have Baylor coming in, just missing a bowl, 5 and 7. I think they've got an opportunity to, they'll be 3-0. I think as they host Iowa State on September 25th. They have Texas Southern at home. They go to Texas State, marking one of those things that you talked about, a Big 12 school or a Power 5 school going to a Group of 5 school. They go to Texas State, and then they go to Kansas on September 18th. So they'll have a lot of I think at least early on they'll have a lot of confidence in Dave Aranda's second year, but just barely miss the bowl eligibility there at number 8. And so in number 7 I have Kansas State. I think Kansas State, they were really good early last year, but they kind of struggled a little bit down the stretch. I think they'll be a little bit more consistent this year. They'll certainly get back to bowl eligibility in 2021. I like what I've seen in the preseason in terms of fall out of them. Skylar Thompson appears to be a guy that's kind of taking the step. Could be in for the best season that Kansas State has had from a playoff, from a kind of a quarterback perspective, maybe since Colin Klein was there. So I've got Kansas State there at number 7. And then we've got a little bit of a log jam here for 4, 5, and 6. So I have Texas here at 8 and 4. I think more so the schedule. I think the schedule's a little bit tough for them in conference play. And then I think just having Sarkisian back, or not having him back, but back as a head coach on the sidelines for Texas, I think just learning the new schemes on the offensive defensive side of the ball, and then really kind of understanding what the quarterback situation looks like. I think we all kind of came into this assuming that Casey Thompson would be the guy. I've heard they haven't solidified that quarterback position yet. Could be Hudson Card might be taking a little bit of a lead there, but I do think there's a chance that they could be a little bit unsettled early on. And look, that schedule early on is very tough. Louisiana and then at Arkansas, they could very easily find themselves 0-2, and if they're 0-2, I think they're in a world of hurt early on. But if they get those 2 wins, they could kind of build some confidence going into the middle half of the season, because they do go to, when you look at their schedule, they go to TCU, to Iowa State, and to West Virginia, outside of having the annual Oklahoma game there, Red River and Dallas. So tough schedule for them. I've got Oklahoma State at number 5. I think just from a benefit of the doubt, schedule-wise, I think Oklahoma State wins the tiebreaker over Texas, and I think Oklahoma State's able to navigate a somewhat not an incredibly difficult early season schedule, but they do have Tulsa, they do go to Boise, and then they have Kansas State and Baylor. So you'd like to see, if you're an Oklahoma State fan, that team should probably be 5-0 going into Texas. So I think that'll be interesting to see. However, that schedule gets tough. They have a 4-game gauntlet mark where they go to at Texas, at Iowa State, Kansas at home, and then at West Virginia. So I think their season kind of really comes down to those 4 games and how they're able to really navigate that schedule. And West Virginia I have here at number 4. I think West Virginia, when you look at it from a talent perspective, specifically on the field, you can make an argument that Oklahoma State and Texas could potentially have better talent. I think West Virginia has the opportunity to have not as tough of a schedule. They go to Oklahoma and they go to TCU, but they host Oklahoma State, they host Texas, and they I believe they host Iowa State as well. Yes, Iowa State, Oklahoma State, and Texas. So 3 of the the top 5 in the conference, 5 or 6 in the conference, they get to play at West Virginia. So I think with that being said, I have them at 8-4 and the leader of that kind of middle of the pack area. Number 3, I have TCU. I think they're going to be a much improved team here in 2021. The schedule sets up pretty well for them early. They start with Duquesne and California at home, but before their first 4 games that are at home. So, they have an opportunity. I think they're going to be better at the quarterback position. Having a 3rd-year starter there, they've got better on defense. Certainly, they're always there. The wide receiver, the skill positions are a little bit better than what they've been in the past. And then number 2, I have Iowa State, coming in, and I think Iowa State is, I have them tied with TCU at 7-2 in the league, and I think I have Iowa State actually beating TCU head to head in that game towards the end of the year. So that's what takes Iowa State over from a number 2 perspective. Looking at them, Iowa State always seems to lose a game early on that they typically wouldn't, that you wouldn't expect them to. So I think given the fact that it may be a little bit different this year, but I have Iowa coming in and beating Iowa State in Ames this year, just because I think that's the game that that they're pointing to early on, and I think that's the one that they drop early on in the conference, and then when you come to Oklahoma, we had talked about this a little bit last week, Mark, just in terms of what the percentages are of Oklahoma going undefeated this year, not only in conference but total. And Oklahoma hasn't done this for quite some time, but I just think this is the year that they take advantage, and they have take advantage of that opportunity. The schedule, sets up well for them early on, and kind of really throughout the conference. In the non-conference slate, when you look at the matchup against Tulane, and then Western Carolina and Nebraska at home, and then a lot of those difficult games that they have against some of those teams are either at home or a neutral site. You've got West Virginia at home, you've got TCU at home, obviously you have Texas and Dallas. You go to some of the teams that are struggling a little bit in terms of the kind of the lower part of the conference. You go to Baylor, you go to Kansas, and then you get to host Iowa State. So I think the matchups and everything that this Oklahoma team has going for them points to certainly conventional wisdom would say that, based on the history, that there's a game that they'll drop somewhere, but it's so hard to predict which one of those games they might drop. And I just think with all of the with all the excitement that they have, I think they're properly motivated at the right positions. That's struggled a little bit over the past couple of years, and certainly with the understanding and a little bit of a chip on their shoulder, I think, this year from a playoff perspective. 1, not making it this last year, and 2, the struggles that they've had in the playoffs, that gives them the proper motivation to really kind of bring that same intensity that they need to go undefeated each and every week.
Yeah, a few nuances stand out to me right there. When you talk about scheduling advantages or disadvantages, there's obviously less to talk about in the Big 12 than any other conference. So you're looking at some really good nuances there, because in the other conferences, you can just flat out say, okay, well, here's 2 teams competing in a particular division, and they play everyone in the division. They play each other, but Team A plays 2 very difficult non-division games, and Team B plays 2 easy division games. So there's a huge advantage. Well, everybody plays everybody in the Big 12, but what you've pointed out is, there is a 5-4 split, first of all, unless you're Oklahoma and Texas, who play the neutral site game and therefore play 4 home, 4 away. But there's a 5-4 split, home and away, for each team. So who has the advantage there? Number 1. Number 2, as I look at it, if you're one of those mid-tier or upper to mid-tier teams, Texas, West Virginia, Oklahoma State, this may be conceding something, but if you're going to lose to Iowa State and Oklahoma anyway, you might as well just play them on the road and then play the teams that you're competing with for more wins play them at home. It's like playing Kansas. Might as well burn a road game playing at Kansas rather than a home game.
Yeah.
And then obviously you're looking at difficult back-to-backs and difficult stretches, as you pointed out as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at Oklahoma's specific stretch, you've got the middle of the year where they go to Kansas State, then they go to Dallas, and then they come back and host TCU. I think if they were going to drop a game, I think the TCU game is one that we've talked about here. That could be a potential, specifically depending on how the game against Texas goes. They could have a little bit of a hangover there. Obviously, Iowa, the last 2 games of the year. Well, even when you talk about Baylor, they go to Baylor, they host Iowa State, then they go to Oklahoma State. So I think those 2 stretches are the stretches that Oklahoma needs to look out for specifically. And then specifically that last game of the year, it's always, Oklahoma has such a decided advantage over Oklahoma State in their, in that in-state rivalry, but it might be a little bit different this year. Who knows? We may know a little bit more about when Oklahoma and Texas officially go to the SEC by then, and then does that game mean even a little bit more for Oklahoma State at that time?
I am I'll emphasize slightly surprised that you're picking Iowa over Iowa State. I think from a national perspective, Iowa State's they're kind of the darlings of the college football world. People hoping that they can knock off Oklahoma. People, of course, rooting for them just because they've been down forever, and they're suddenly a power of sorts. It still has to be proven to me past this season. But, yeah, I think people are I think that Vegas is going to trot out a line that's pretty close, and those people that are more into the numbers and crunching what actually is most likely to happen see that as a closer game, as your typical college football fan, I think, sees Iowa as just your standard Iowa team that's going to go 8-4, whereas Iowa State's competing for a Big 12 championship, a playoff appearance. And so they got the game at home as well. And I think it's an interesting pick because I don't think it's far-fetched at all to think that Iowa can go in there and win the game.
No, definitely not. Well, and I think, and just to be fair to the Iowa State people, I'm on board with Iowa State. I really like their team. They're very well deserved of a top 10 preseason ranking. I think number 7 or number 8 in the AP. And I think they've got the talent at all, kind of all sides, all positions on the field. I think my main concern early on with them is Matt Campbell, and not just him, but the entire program is in a position where they've never been in the history of the program. They've never been top 10 preseason. They've not won a Big 12 championship. How do they handle that early on? Iowa, the second week of the year, probably going to be a game day potential. So all eyes are on the state of Iowa. All eyes are on this team. And to your point, they have all of the, really kind of the pressure in that game. They're fighting for a chance to play in the playoffs and to win the Big 12 championship, to your point. And, how do they react to that? It'll be interesting. One of the best games the second week of the year, or second week of the season, no doubt.
Absolutely. I can't wait to see it. I also think that when you go through predictions and you're either you just throw the record out there like you currently are doing and I'm releasing prediction videos, and I thought about putting my picks up there, but I've got about half the conference release, so it just involved more typing as well. So anyway, I just went with Jason's, but so I'm releasing my predictions and I've done it in the past the way a lot of people want you to do it, and that's go through every game and say, instead of just saying, okay, they're going to go 9-3 in the conference, 7-2 in the conference, 9-3 overall, they want the specific results.
Yeah.
Anytime you deviate outside of the chalk, so we can look at any team in the top 25 and pretty much determine, okay, that team's supposed to go about 10-2, and the 2 losses are pretty much supposed to come from these 2 games. Well, sure, that happens most of the time, but most of the times not like 90-some% of the time. Most of the times, like 70% of the time. at the end of this college football season, if you go back and look at the teams that lost games, the really good teams like the 9-3, 8-4 kind of teams, and then even beyond that, the 11-1 Oklahoma kind of teams, it's not always obviously with Oklahoma, it's been Kansas State twice. It's been other teams in the past that weren't necessarily on their level. With Ohio State, it's been Purdue and Iowa when they were 5-7 lost teams. Clemson's lost to Syracuse and Pitt when they were marginal football teams, and Clemson was competing for national championships. So, you get called crazy on one hand, but probably a third of the time, the games by the big teams are not lost to the teams that they're supposed to lose to.
No, you're absolutely right. And to your point, Mark, that's what's about it. And that's why I didn't go necessarily line by line, team by team to see that, because some of these, and I think it's even more so, the parity in the college football game is more prevalent, I think, than it's ever been, and I think will be this year. So it's so hard to pick those upsets, and things happen, injuries happen, suspensions. None of us really know what COVID's really even going to look like, this year. I mean, hopefully not to the degree that it was last year, but certainly some teams are going to have to deal with it. So yeah, there's just a lot of unknowns, and it's what makes it the best. In my opinion, one of the best sport in the world.
Georgia finished in the top 5 2 years ago. Who did they lose to? South Carolina, 4-8. Oregon went on to win the Rose Bowl and win the Pac-12 championship, finish in the top 6 or 7. Who'd they lose to? Well, they went to Arizona State late in the year and lost to a 6-loss team. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be a portion of the losses out there by the top 10 to 15 teams in the nation. Yeah. Interesting stuff. Again, Jason Ray, last word on college football. Catch his work over there. Please catch him. And we're promoting this throughout because we want this to be ingrained in everybody's minds that when that Oklahoma game's off the air, catch Jason right here, breaking down the game and engaging with you, comments and questions, just like we do right here with you every Friday. And folks, do us a favor and bring in some more college football fans. And so we can have a bigger show and a better time and do this for a long, long time for all of you. We appreciate your support and always enjoy the conversation and can't wait for college football, which we're going to have in a limited dose next Saturday and then full throttle on September 4th. Jason, anything else before we bid adieu?
No, I don't think so. I'm just excited to get it started. I'm excited for the pregame and postgame shows to kind of talk about it. It's one of the things that, growing up, I always listened on the way back from games. I always listened to post-game shows and, part of the pregame, and was really excited to do this with everybody. So, looking forward to it.
And now to get a post-game show where you can actually ask questions and interact with the host is something, obviously, that's been new to our internet age. All right. We will check back with everybody next Friday, 2:30 Eastern, 1:30 Central. Please subscribe, hit the bell for the notifications to know when we go live. Jason, have a great weekend.
All right. Thanks, you too.